Tonight, Iran laughed at America's biggest bomb until B-2 bombers over Fordow did this.
At 3:47 a.m. this year, federal authorities in the nation of Valdoria executed the largest coordinated takedown of organized crime in the entire history of the Western Continental Alliance. What they discovered was not just a drug empire, it was a shadow government, a cartel so deeply embedded in the highest levels of state power that it had essentially rewritten the laws of an entire nation to serve its own interests. The numbers were staggering. Over 742 kilograms of processed narcotics seized in a single night, $43 million in untraceable currency confiscated from hidden vaults, 31 tons of precursor chemicals destined for illegal drug manufacturing. But the real shock came later. In the weeks that followed, investigators would uncover something far darker than any drug operation. The Nordov cartel had turned Valdoria into its own personal kingdom, with government officials, military commanders, and law enforcement acting as willing partners in one of the most audacious criminal conspiracies ever conceived. This is how it happened. This is how a cartel nearly conquered an entire nation from the inside. 3:47 a.m. The city of Bellefonte, Valdoria's capital, lay under a thick blanket of fog. Streetlights dissolved into amber halos. The harbor district was silent except for the distant rumble of container ships and the occasional horn call echoing across the water. For most people in the city, it was just another cold night. They had no idea what was coming. At that exact moment, 218 federal agents from the Valdorian Federal Investigation Bureau, or VFIB, moved into position across 7 simultaneous locations throughout the city. They came in unmarked vehicles, black SUVs with tinted windows, tactical teams in body armor with communication headsets, moving with the precision of a machine. These were elite units, men and women who had trained for months for this single operation. They carried arrest warrants signed by 3 different federal judges. They had authorization to use whatever force was necessary. The first target was the Nordov Distribution Hub, a sprawling warehouse complex in the industrial zone of Bellefonte's east side. On paper, it was registered as a legitimate import-export business handling agricultural equipment. In reality, it was the pumping heart of the entire narcotics operation. Tons of cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, methamphetamine, all flowing through this single facility, repackaged, redistributed across the continent. At 3:52 a.m., the agents breached the main gate. Flashbangs erupted in the darkness. The sound was like thunder cracking open the sky. Doors exploded inward. Agents poured through in coordinated waves, weapons raised, shouting commands that echoed off concrete walls. Inside, cartel operatives scrambled. Some tried to run. Others reached for weapons. One man, a mid-level distributor named Korvaksiles, tried to destroy evidence by throwing packets of fentanyl into a burning barrel in the corner of the warehouse. He didn't make it. An agent tackled him to the ground 30 feet from his goal. Within minutes, the entire facility was secured. But this was just the beginning. Across the city, 6 other teams were hitting their targets simultaneously. The Northside Processing Facility, a supposedly abandoned pharmaceutical research building that had been converted into a full-scale drug superlab. Agents found 312 kilograms of nearly pure cocaine stacked in industrial storage bins, along with 20 tons of precursor chemicals and equipment for manufacturing fentanyl pills. The chemists working there surrendered without resistance. They knew what would happen if they didn't. The Riverside Financial Center, a glass and steel office tower in downtown Bellefonte that housed the cartel's money laundering operation. 17 floors of legitimate-looking businesses, accounting firms, investment companies, insurance brokers. All of it was fake. All of it was designed to move stolen money through layers of shell corporations and fake transactions. Agents seized $43 million in cash from hidden vaults. They found ledgers documenting bribes paid to government officials. Names, amounts, dates. A roadmap of corruption written in ink and numbers. The Harbor District safe houses, 3 separate luxury apartment buildings where high-ranking cartel members lived under assumed identities. Agents arrested 11 people, including 2 members of the cartel's inner council. As they were led away in handcuffs, neighbors watched from windows, shocked. They had lived next to some of the most dangerous criminals in the world and had no idea. The luxury auto dealership on Commerce Street, a front business that appeared to sell high-end vehicles. In reality, it was a money laundering nexus where drug profits were converted into the purchase of exotic cars, which were then exported and sold for cash on the black market in neighboring nations. The Private Club on Velvet Row, an exclusive establishment that didn't appear in any phone book or business directory. Membership was by invitation only. Inside, agents found a gambling den, a drug distribution point, and evidence of human trafficking. They arrested the club's manager and seized encrypted communication devices. And then there was the 7th location, the one that changed everything, the Nordov Administrative Center. a nondescript government building in the Civic District, 5 stories of concrete and glass that looked like any other bureaucratic structure in Bellefonte. Most people who worked there had no idea what was really happening on the 3rd floor. Behind a locked door marked Strategic Planning Division, in a temperature-controlled server room, federal agents found what would become the smoking gun of the entire operation. Encrypted hard drives, 17 of them. Server banks with military-grade security. Communication logs spanning 4 years. Digital signatures. Encrypted authorization keys. And financial records so detailed, so comprehensive, that they painted a complete picture of the conspiracy. When cyber forensics analysts at VFIB headquarters cracked the encryption 48 hours later, what they found was beyond anything law enforcement had anticipated. This wasn't just a cartel. This was a government operation, a shadow state within the state itself. The operation had a code name, Project Black Shield. The network was massive. Shell companies registered in 17 different nations. Ghost corporations with no physical locations. Offshore accounts in places like the Cayman Islands, Singapore, and the Seychelles. Fake charities and non-profit foundations that existed only on paper. Restaurant chains, logistics companies, import-export businesses, pharmaceutical distribution networks, agricultural suppliers. Hundreds of legitimate-looking entities, all owned by the same people, all serving the same purpose, to move money, drugs, and influence across the continent. But the money flows were what truly revealed the scope of the conspiracy. Agents traced billions of dollars moving in complex patterns. A payment from a cartel operation in Valdoria would move to a shell company in Andorra, then to a fake charity in Luxembourg, then to an investment firm in Singapore, then back to Valdoria through a restaurant chain's accounts, then distributed to government officials as consulting fees or campaign contributions or charitable donations. The pattern was brilliant. The amounts were staggering, and at the center of it all was one name, one signature, one encrypted authorization key that appeared on every major transaction, every major operation, every major decision. Governor Matthias Corvale. Corvale was the governor of Valdoria's most powerful province, the western region that contained Bellefonte and the nation's primary ports. He was a political figure of enormous prominence, a man who had been mentioned as a potential future president. Handsome, articulate, known for his tough stance on crime and his business-friendly policies. He had built a reputation as a reformer, someone who wanted to modernize Valdoria's economy and expand its global trade relationships. It was all a cover. The encrypted files showed that Corvale didn't just tolerate the Nordov cartel. He didn't just accept bribes. He didn't just look the other way. He commanded it. He directed it. He had essentially privatized the state's entire security apparatus and turned it into an enforcement arm for the cartel's operations. Border Patrol officers reported to him before they reported to their official commanders. Coast Guard captains received encrypted messages telling them which shipments to allow through and which to intercept. Police chiefs across the province received orders about which raids to conduct and which criminals to arrest. Prosecutors knew which cases to pursue and which to drop. What federal investigators were looking at was not corruption. Corruption implies a system that has been compromised from within. This was different. This was command-level collusion. This was engineered treason. This was a complete inversion of state power where the cartel had essentially become the government. The files contained evidence of something even more chilling, a long-term strategic plan. Corvale and the cartel had designed a 20-year expansion strategy. Within a decade, they intended to have placed cartel loyalists in key positions throughout Valdoria's federal government. Within 2 decades, they intended to control the presidency itself. The goal was nothing less than the transformation of Valdoria into a permanent cartel state, a nation whose entire apparatus of power would exist to serve the interests of organized crime. As one analyst put it in her report, this is not infiltration of the state. This is the state being redesigned for the cartel. The words would echo through federal investigations for months to come. But Operation Crimson Gate was far from over. In fact, the largest phase had barely begun. 5:14 a.m. Federal Command Center, VFIB headquarters, the city of Valdemont, 300 kilometers north of Bellefonte. The war room was massive. Dozens of screens displaying real-time data. Satellite feeds from overhead reconnaissance aircraft. Live video feeds from tactical teams positioned across the province. A giant digital map with 57 red markers pulsing across multiple cities and regions. Each marker represented a target. Each target represented a piece of the Nordov cartel's operation. Federal Director Helena Morris stood at the center of the room, flanked by commanders from the various law enforcement agencies. Behind her, a wall of screens showed weather patterns, traffic flows, and logistics data. In her hands, she held the final authorization order. Operation Crimson Gate, Phase 2, the eradication phase. We have 1,247 federal agents positioned across the province, Director Morris said, her voice steady and controlled. 84 tactical teams, 24 SWAT units, federal marshals, border patrol, Coast Guard, military support units standing by. We have aerial reconnaissance from 3 helicopter squadrons, ground-based surveillance from drone operations, communication interception across all known cartel frequencies, and we have authorization for lethal force if necessary. She paused, looking at the digital map with all its red markers. At 5:30 a.m., we execute the complete takedown, every target simultaneously, 47 locations across 12 cities. We do this right. We dismantle the entire operation in a single coordinated strike. We do this wrong. Organized crime takes control of Valdoria. There is no middle ground. Move. At 5:30 a.m. sharp, the largest coordinated law enforcement operation in Valdorian history began. In the coastal city of Portside, 30 kilometers south of Bellefonte, federal agents and Coast Guard units raided an illegal drug manufacturing facility disguised as a fishing processing plant. They found 2 tons of cocaine in storage containers labeled as frozen fish. They found a submarine, an actual semi-submersible drug smuggling vessel under construction in an underground facility connected to the warehouse. The vessel could carry 5 tons of narcotics and travel underwater at depths that made radar detection nearly impossible. Agents arrested 23 people and seized over $80 million in equipment and product. In the desert region east of Bellefonte, a SWAT team approached what appeared to be an abandoned mining compound. In reality, it was one of the largest methamphetamine superlabs on the continent. Inside a series of interconnected tunnels and chambers hidden beneath the desert, chemists were processing hundreds of kilograms of raw precursor materials. When agents breached the facility, they found 400 kilograms of completed methamphetamine, 200 kilograms of fentanyl powder, and precursor chemicals sufficient to manufacture another ton of finished narcotics. The raid took 14 minutes. No shots were fired. 41 people were arrested. In the mountain region that bordered neighboring nations, federal border patrol units and army support teams discovered an extensive network of drug smuggling tunnels. These weren't simple holes in the ground. They were sophisticated operations with reinforced walls, electric lighting, ventilation systems, and rail tracks for moving cargo. The network extended for over 18 kilometers and connected to cartel operations on both sides of the border. Agents sealed the tunnels with explosives and arrested 12 tunnel operators who were caught mid-shift. In 3 separate luxury estates in the hillside communities north of Bellefonte, federal agents arrested high-ranking cartel members and corrupt government officials in dawn raids. They seized not just cash and drugs but also documents proving years of coordinated criminal activity. One estate contained a private security force of 40 armed men. The confrontation lasted 3 hours and resulted in 8 arrests and the seizure of 42 weapons. In the harbor district, Coast Guard units intercepted 4 cargo ships attempting to leave port. The ships' manifests claimed they were carrying agricultural equipment bound for South American markets. The holds actually contained 15 tons of cocaine, 20 tons of precursor chemicals, and documentation proving that the cartel had been moving product through international waters for years with the knowledge and assistance of Valdorian port authorities. In the financial district, federal agents raided 15 office buildings and seized servers, documents, and physical currency. Over $120 million in cash was recovered. Bank records documented years of fraudulent transactions. Shell company registrations were seized. Cryptocurrency wallets were identified and frozen. The financial backbone of the entire cartel operation was dismantled in a single morning. By 11:47 a.m., when the coordinated operation concluded, the Nordhoff cartel had been effectively destroyed as a functioning organization. Over 900 people had been arrested. 227 tons of narcotics and precursor chemicals had been seized. $584 million in cash, assets, and property had been confiscated. 3 submarines and 42 vehicles had been recovered. Drug tunnels spanning nearly 50 kilometers had been discovered and sealed. One federal agent summarized it in his after-action report. The underworld took more damage in 6 hours than it has taken in the last 6 years across all previous operations combined. It was an assessment that would prove accurate, but the deeper scandal was only beginning to emerge. The subsequent weeks revealed a level of infiltration that shook the foundations of Valdorian law enforcement. When agents examined the seized servers and encrypted communications logs, they found evidence of systematic corruption reaching into the highest levels of government. A deputy chief of the Bellefonte Police Department, a man named Victor Doslan who had been in law enforcement for 28 years, had been on the cartel payroll for the past 12 years. He had received over $4 million in payments. In exchange, he had provided advance warning of raids, falsified patrol records to allow drug shipments to pass unchecked through the city, and personally leaked details about ongoing investigations to cartel leadership. A federal border patrol commander named Colonel Theron Masick had accepted bribes totaling $6 million over a 10-year period. He had deliberately scheduled maintenance on surveillance equipment during the exact times when cartel drug convoys were crossing the border. He had reassigned conscientious officers who questioned suspicious activity and replaced them with cartel loyalists. When questioned about why certain sectors of the border saw dramatically lower seizure rates than others, he had falsified reports to hide the discrepancies. 3 federal judges, individuals with the power to issue or deny warrants, to sentence criminals, to interpret the law itself, had been compromised. They had received payments disguised as consulting fees and investment returns. In exchange, they had dismissed cases against cartel members, reduced sentences for convicted traffickers, and issued arrest warrants for federal agents who got too close to the investigation. A U.S. congressional representative named Senator Clayton Vex, a man who sat on committees overseeing law enforcement funding and policy, had been receiving monthly payments of $200,000. In exchange, he had prevented investigations into the cartel from receiving federal funding, had lobbied to restrict law enforcement surveillance capabilities in Valdoria, and had personally blocked the appointment of an aggressive U.S. Attorney General who had threatened to investigate the province. When federal investigators began making arrests, the scope of the betrayal became even more apparent. Patrol officers, detectives, prosecutors, federal agents working in regional offices, low-level functionaries in government agencies. The network of compromised officials numbered in the hundreds. Each person had their role. Each had been paid. Each had contributed to what was essentially a parallel enforcement system, a shadow police force that served the cartel's interests instead of the nation's laws. One honest officer, Detective Maria Lussens of the Belafonte Police Department, described her experience in a closed-door interview with federal investigators. You work alongside someone for 5 years. You trust them. You depend on them to have your back. Then you find out they were reporting your movements to criminals. They were stealing evidence. They were lying in court. It's not just that you feel betrayed. It's that the entire foundation of what you believed you were doing, serving justice, protecting people, all of it becomes questionable. If your partner was corrupt, what else might be corrupted? How many arrests were made for the wrong reasons? How many guilty people walked free because judges on the payroll dismissed the cases? The discovery of systemic law enforcement corruption led to the single largest internal affairs investigation in Valdorian history. Over 400 officers were placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. 43 were arrested and charged with various felonies. 17 federal judges and prosecutors were indicted. 2 state senators resigned before they could be arrested. The U.S. congressional representative was charged with racketeering and bribery. That year, Valdorian law enforcement had undergone a complete restructuring. Entire departments were reorganized. Commanders were replaced. Training programs were redesigned. The underlying principle was clear. The system had been compromised so thoroughly that it needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. Trust, once broken, is the hardest thing to restore. But the nation had no choice. But Operation Crimson Gate had revealed something even larger. The Nordhoff cartel's operations were not limited to Valdoria. They extended across the entire continent. As federal investigators traced the financial networks and logistics routes, they discovered that the cartel's distribution system was continental in scale. Drugs originating in Valdoria were moved through established trade corridors into neighboring nations. Trucking contractors with legitimate-appearing companies moved shipments across borders using falsified manifests. Shipping containers marked as containing agricultural products, automotive parts, or industrial equipment actually contained tons of narcotics. Way stations on major highways were conveniently closed for maintenance during the exact times when cartel convoys passed through. Customs inspectors at border crossings had been bribed or coerced into overlooking suspicious shipments. The cartel was moving approximately 200 tons of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl per month across continental trade routes. This wasn't the work of one nation's law enforcement. This was a transnational criminal conspiracy that required coordination with federal authorities, international agencies, and military units from multiple nations. A task force was assembled. It included not just Valdorian authorities but also federal agencies from 5 neighboring nations, Interpol representatives, and military intelligence officers from several countries. What they discovered was a master plan so ambitious that it seemed almost impossible that such a conspiracy could function without being detected. The plan, documented in Corvales's personal encrypted files, had a timeline the cartel intended to control the drug supply across 3 continents. They intended to establish permanent bases of operation in every major city in the Western Continental Alliance. They intended to have placed cartel loyalists in the highest positions of government across multiple nations. It wasn't just about drugs. It was about power. Absolute, systematic, transnational power. The Nordhoff cartel wasn't trying to sell narcotics. It was trying to become a shadow government that would eventually step out of the shadows and rule openly. One federal intelligence analyst described it this way: "We were looking at a criminal conspiracy designed to become a state. If they had succeeded, in 20 years, organized crime would have had more political power than democracy." Governor Matthias Corvallis was arrested 1 week after Operation Crimson Gate began. He was charged with conspiracy to traffic drugs, money laundering, bribery, racketeering, and treason. When federal agents arrived at his residence to take him into custody, he didn't resist. He simply smiled, as if he had always known this day would come. He was convicted 18 months later and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. But his conviction was just one outcome among many. The investigation continued for years. Additional cells of the cartel were discovered in other nations. Additional corrupt officials were arrested. The financial networks were traced and dismantled. The drug supply chains were disrupted. But the real damage was impossible to quantify in numbers alone. Consider the human cost. Fentanyl from Nordov cartel labs had been distributed across the continent for years. It had killed tens of thousands of people. Children who never had a chance. Parents who lost their lives to addiction. Communities that were hollowed out by the opioid epidemic. That suffering was the true price of the cartel's operation. That suffering was the reason the operation had to be destroyed. Power, you understand, does not always reveal itself through violence. Sometimes power only needs silence. Sometimes it only needs ambition. Sometimes it only needs people who are willing to compromise their principles for money. The Nordov cartel succeeded for as long as it did because people in positions of authority chose to allow it to succeed. They were paid, yes, but they also made a choice. That choice nearly cost a nation its democracy. This story is a warning. A warning about how corruption can hide in plain sight. A warning about how organized crime can infiltrate government at the highest levels. A warning about what happens when the institutions that are supposed to protect people decide instead to prey on them. Operation Crimson Gate succeeded because federal law enforcement refused to give up. Because honest agents and officers continued to do their jobs despite working alongside people who had been compromised. Because a judge somewhere signed a warrant even though judges in the same courthouse were on the cartel payroll. Because ordinary people in government continued to believe that the system could be fixed, even when the system had been thoroughly corrupted. The Nordov cartel is gone now. Its leaders are in prison. Its networks are dismantled. Its money is seized. But the work of rebuilding trust in institutions, that work continues. And it will continue for years to come. If you've made it this far, you understand why this story matters. You understand that corruption is not abstract. It is real. It affects real people in real communities. Share this story. Tell others what happened. Keep the truth alive. Because truth is the only thing that corruption cannot tolerate. Remember, this entire narrative is fictional. All characters, all organizations, all scenarios are created for entertainment and storytelling purposes. But the dangers of corruption, infiltration, and the concentration of unchecked power, those dangers are real.